promised, we are joined by Brett Siegel of ClutchPoints, friend of the show. Love to have Brett on, especially after his Siegel Scoops drops. Brett, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Allen, how you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm well, man. And I know it's the off season, but things are just now heating up for you. Let's start here with the Kings, and then we'll go a little bit more broad throughout the segment. What is the latest on DeMar DeRozan and his connection to certain teams and his desire to either stay in Sacramento if they get a point guard or make his way to whatever he believes to be a true contender?
Well, one of the biggest unknowns right now in the Western Conference is the Sacramento Kings, and it's in pertaining to the direction of which they're going to go. Last season, or this season that's concluding now, they just traded De'Aaron Fox, and he was the cornerstone of their franchise. He got traded to the San Antonio Spurs, and it seemed like the writing was on the wall since last offseason that he was going to be on the move at some point, that his future was not going to be with the Kings. Leadership, him and his representation were not seeing eye to eye, and so they got ahead of the curve. They got rid of what they suspected would become a problem before it ultimately did. And so they go out, they add Zach LaVine, and reuniting him with DeMar DeRozan, who they had added last offseason. Still have Malik Monk. You still have Domantas Sabonis. But this is a team that didn't really do anything this season and did not meet expectations. Obviously, after making the playoffs a couple of years ago and having that grand season where Fox was the clutch player of the year and Mike Brown the coach of the year, those guys aren't around anymore. So you're not entering new territory for the Kings. Are you going to take a step back, or are you going to potentially push more chips in to try to become a force in the West? And with how crowded everything is out there, there's so many championship teams, and you can go up and down the list. The Thunder aren't going anywhere. The Rockets are only going to get better. As long as LeBron and Luka are playing, they're going to be in the conversation. Then you still have teams like the Nuggets, the Clippers, the Timberwolves, the Warriors. So where do the Kings fit into this picture? And it's really hard to project right now, where with their current payroll and their current roster, of this team making one or two moves and suddenly becoming better than those teams that we just listed. So there's some big decisions for new GM Scott Perry to make. And obviously it starts at the very top with DeMar DeRozan. He's nearing the end of his career. He still has 2 more years left on his contract. And he is on a favorable deal for teams that do want an established all-star and can go out and make a trade. He's only making around $24-25 million next season, a very movable, team-friendly contract for a superstar player that you know what you're going to get. And there's obviously going to be a level of interest in him out there. But again, it comes down to, what are the Kings feeling? Do they feel like that they want to move from DeRozan, and what kind of value can they get for him on the open market?
Yeah, Brett, I think that was going to be my next question. When it comes to DeMar, out here we watched him, and a lot of people thought, man, I don't really know how this is going to translate to a championship team and things like that. Then it kind of swung to, well, there's only one Kevin Durant. There's only one Giannis. We can use the Rockets, for example. If they swing and miss on both those guys, I think that DeMar DeRozan is a pretty good consolation prize. How strong do you think the market will be for DeMar DeRozan?
I wouldn't necessarily put it in the same direction as Giannis and KD. I don't think that those teams are going to view DeRozan as a backup plan per se, because he is a much different player. He's more of a traditional mid-range jumper, more of a facilitating wing, not that big of a three-point shooter. He's nearing the end of the line. He doesn't have the same motor that he once had, but still a stable presence. So when you look at, well, what teams possibly make sense, maybe if Giannis stays with Milwaukee, perhaps DeMar DeRozan is a player they look to target late in his career, only 2 years left on his contract, smaller contract than most big stars. And it wouldn't take a whole lot to necessarily get DeRozan at this time. When you look at his value, he's not going to demand much more than a first-round pick. And if it is a first-round pick, it's most likely going to come with protections. Teams aren't going to be giving up the house for a guy like DeRozan like they would Durant or Giannis that can immediately change your championship outlook. DeRozan, can he help your championship outlook? Absolutely, but he's not one of those 1A guys anymore like a Giannis or Kevin Durant. So I think that he can be an excellent complementary player. And that's why I bring up a team like the Bucks. You're not going to have Damian Lillard for the vast majority, if not all, of the 25-26 season. If Giannis stays, he wants win-now talents. DeRozan's the guy that you can bring in, help to win right now, and not have long-term ties to contractually. So that's one team that you're looking at. Maybe a team like the Boston Celtics, depending on what moves they look to make this offseason. You have Jason Tatum also dealing with an Achilles injury, and they're going to be looking to cut some costs. So is there a guy there on the Celtics roster that the Kings could potentially look to target and leverage DeRozan as a replacement for Tatum next to Jaylen Brown moving forward. And of course, as we wrote on Clutch Points, a guy like Drew Holiday is going to be on the Sacramento Kings radar. He's a guy that Scott Perry has liked in previous years of teams that he's been with. And he's a stable veteran that can come in and provide a sense of production at that point guard spot on both ends of the floor and be a good complementary piece next to Malik Monk and Domantas Sabonis. So that's certainly a name that if I'm a Kings fan, I'm keeping an eye on what happens in Boston with Drew Holiday this offseason.
Talking to Brett Siegel of Clutch Points. Yeah, Brett, let's stay on the Drew Holiday train for a moment. How are the Celtics viewing Drew Holiday from the standpoint of a bad contract? I think that's the one thing when we were reading your article late last week, the question became, okay, let's say they're interested in DeMar DeRozan. There is a world there, I would say a very obvious world where DeMar's contract, and I know fit matters, the Kings and Kings fans learned that very quickly this season, but DeMar DeRozan's contract is much better than Drew Holiday's. Is there a world where the Celtics say, okay, here, take a Sam Hauser or even take a pick swap or something like that? How badly do they want to move on from Drew Holiday's contract?
Right. So it's a two-part question because the two teams that are involved have much different scenarios and much different viewpoints of how the money's flowing right now. And let's look at the Celtics, for example. They're going to have a payroll of around $240, $250 million next season, and their taxes are going to be around the same. So they could wind up having a $500 million total payroll, which would be a historic mark. And that's something that new ownership in the Celtics organization doesn't necessarily want at this time. So they're going to be evaluating all options right now. They're going to be looking at the flow of money for future years. When Tatum comes back, what is this team going to look like? And Brad Stevens made it very clear in his end of season press conference that they still view themselves as one of the top teams in the East. They're not going to be going through a full rebuild process where they're just putting guys up for sale and getting as much value as they can. They still believe that this is a team that can contend for multiple championships when Tatum returns. They still have last year's finals MVP in Jaylen Brown, who doesn't look like he's going to be going anywhere. Obviously, after the Luka Doncic trade, never say never.
Right.
But all indications right now are that Jaylen Brown is going to be staying with the Celtics. I feel pretty confident in saying that the same will happen with Derek White. He's a player that they highly value and see him as that third cog in the wheel next to Brown and Tatum in their championship run. So now the question becomes, if you're going to cut costs, is it going to be Kristaps Porzingis or Drew Holiday? And then that's where the second part of the question comes in with the Kings of, is it a bad contract in quotes? Because when you talk about bad contract, if you're going out and trying to make the playoffs and that's your goal and you want to be a championship contender, I don't view any number for Drew Holiday being a bad contract because he's a proven veteran, a proven champion with two different teams and a gold medalist on Team USA. He can help you win. So it's not a bad contract if you're achieving your goal. And so I think that that's not necessarily the best term to use, but from a front office standpoint for the Kings, is that a contract that you want to tie yourself down to? And that's kind of where the narrative of, oh, he has a bad contract comes from, because Zach LaVine isn't going to be taking a pay cut anytime soon. He's got 2 more years on his contract and making around $90 million in total. You just extended some bonus, and now if you bring in Drew Holiday, you're all of a sudden potentially becoming an apron team. And what moves can you make to really further yourself? So that's kind of where the conversation lies. Out of the two between Holiday and Porzingis on the Celtics side of things, it does seem more likely that they're going to be exploring routes for Porzingis since he's in the final year of his contract, and there would likely be more interest in that standpoint of teams not being tied down long-term. They could immediately free up $30 million and potentially get production from a 7-2 guy that can stretch the floor and prove to be a major factor in their championship run last year.
Talking to Brett Siegel of Clutch Points. Great stuff so far, Brett. Let's go here. You also wrote about the connection with DeMar DeRozan and the Miami Heat. What I want to ask you is from the Miami Heat perspective in terms of what the Kings could get in return, who are you hearing is maybe untouchable? We know they really liked Jaime Jaquez coming off kind of a rough season. They have Jovic as well. They really like Khalil Ware, who the Kings could have drafted, but that's a conversation for a different day. What are the names, if there was a deal that were to be done? Obviously, it's DeRozan, Tyler Hero, and Bam. outside of that, and please don't say Terry Rozier, outside of that, what are some of the names that might come back to Sacramento?
Well, right off the bat, when you look at the Heat's roster and the way that Pat Riley has constructed things there, it's very hard to believe that they're going to be in any fashion move off Tyler Herro. They didn't want to do that for Damian Lillard last season. And obviously there's really not a trade where if you move Herro, it's going to make you that much better. So he's really the pinnacle of their franchise next to Bam Adebayo, another guy that I would be absolutely shocked if they moved off of. And then obviously you can throw in Ware, the rookie standout, all-rookie performer. I don't see them moving him unless there's some kind of major deal that they can swing for a player like Giannis or Kevin Durant. But again, I just don't see it. So who are those other players available? I would say it's probably the rest of the roster. Andrew Wiggins is certainly going to be a part of trade conversations that they have to further improve their roster and outlook in the East. And that's the thing. The Eastern Conference is going to be wide open during the 25-26 season because the Celtics aren't going to be at the very top. Could they still be a playoff team? Absolutely. But they're not viewed as the Goliath to the rest of the team's David in this scenario. And you're still going to have the Cavaliers potentially. But what's going to happen with the Celtics and the trades they make? What's going to happen with the Bucks? What's going to happen with the Knicks if they lose 4-1 in this series against the Pacers? Is Tom Thibodeau going to potentially be out? And will they potentially look to make further roster moves? So there's just a lot of unknown in the East right now, which is why there is a great opportunity for teams like the Heat, who have two established all-stars, to go out and make a big move and solidify their playoff position. So guys like Wiggins, Terry Rozier, Duncan Robinson, those mid-tier contracts of 28, 26, and 20 million respectively, you can package those and potentially move some picks that you have left to go out and get an upgrade. Is it a guy like DeMar DeRozan? We'll see. There's obviously been some great interest there in the past. There was interest in DeRozan before he signed with the Kings from Pat Riley and the Heat. And obviously he's a guy that you can bring in to replicate that Jimmy Butler role on the wing and be a source of scoring next to Herro and Adebayo. The fit makes sense. But on the other side of things, for the Kings, would it make sense? What kind of pieces are you going to get back? Because you're going to want a Jaime Jaquez. You're going to want a Nikola Jovic type of player. You don't want just these older guys like Terry Rozier and Duncan Robinson. You'd maybe be willing to take them if there's a draft pick attached, but you're still going to want one of those younger guys. And those are the questions that the Miami Heat are going to have to answer this offseason.
Brett, one more for you before we let you go. Domantas Sabonis, he's been thrown in some trade generators now, and we've been having some fun with it. Obviously, the season is still going on, but when do you expect stuff to heat up there? And they go with Doug Christie, who obviously Domantas Sabonis, huge fan of. But when do you expect things to heat up there as far as his conversations with the organization, and what would you guess as far as how they'll go?
I don't envision this being something that develops quickly like the De'Aaron Fox situation necessarily this offseason. I think that Sabonis is devoted to the Kings, and he said that many times that he does want to stay there, and he confirmed that when he signed that extension with them to remain with the Kings and kind of shut down all that talk of him looking elsewhere. But he does want some clarity, and we wrote about that at ClutchPoints. Sam Amick at The Athletic has done a fantastic job of covering Sabonis' route with the Kings and what the future holds there. But he wants to know what this organization is going to look like. And that is the question that De'Aaron Fox was seeking answers to for over a year. They both want to know what's going to happen moving forward, because you just fired Mike Brown, you hired Doug Christie, De'Aaron Fox isn't here anymore. You have some aging, proven all-stars in Zach LaVine and DeRozan, but that wasn't able to get you over the hump this season. So what kind of moves is Scott Perry going to make to further the outlook for the Kings and for them to become a top 14 in the West? And I think that that's going to be figured out this offseason with the moves that they make. It's going to be figured out in the first few months leading up to the NBA Cup in December. And then around the trade deadline, there may be a little bit talk about Sabonis. And if the Kings aren't playing well, obviously those rumors will heat up, and we'll hear a lot more about, Sabonis could be on the move, and people in league circles will be really discussing that. But with that kind of contract and the type of player he is, he's not one to really give up midseason on his team and demand a trade. So as of right now, just based on my understanding of where the Kings are and his kind of outlook on the team, I think this is going to be something that goes through the summer, is quiet, enters the season quiet, and then we may hear stuff at the trade deadline. And obviously next summer, based on how the Kings perform, it's going to become a major conversation, because in 2026, he'll have 2 years left on his contract. He'll be 30 years old and a guy that can contribute immediately. And I think that's really when we'll start hearing a lot more about Sabonis.
Brett Siegel, great stuff. As always, be sure to follow Brett on social media, on X. Be sure to check out all of his work on Clutch Points as well. Brett, thank you as always. We'll talk to you again soon, man.
Thanks, Allen.
That was Brett Siegel. When we return, let's react to everything that Brett had to say.